Shabbat Shalom. Whenever I have mentored or coached someone preparing for an interview, my greatest piece of advice is to bring a bottle of water with them into the interview. Why? So that if they are asked a difficult question, they can take a sip of water and give themselves an extra moment to think about their answer. This small act, which gives them about 30 seconds, allows them to consider and plan out how they want to respond. Inevitably, by taking that extra moment, they are able to answer the question more thoughtfully and coherently. While this is good advice for an interview, it's actually good advice for life. We are, after all, only human. At times, we have all spoken or acted without thinking. Sometimes it turns out okay, but more often than not, had we taken a moment to consider what we were about to say or do, we would have spoken more eloquently or acted with more intention. There's a reason we are often reminded to think before we speak or act. We can all think of examples in our own life when we have reacted to a comment or a situation rather than taking a moment before responding. This week we read Parshat Bechar. God outlines the rules for the Shemitah, the sabbatical, and the Jubilee year. The Shemitah year is the 7th year of every 7-year cycle. In that year, the land is given a rest. No regular pruning or harvesting can take place. Just as Shabbat gives our bodies a rest, the Shemitah laws provide the land with a prescribed period of rest for 1 year out of every 7. But more than just the Shemitah, we also learn about the Jubilee year. It comes at the end of 7 cycles of 7, so it is the 50th year. The Jubilee year, it is not only the land that is mandated to pause. We are mandated to let the land lie fallow, to return it to its original owners, to forgive all debts, and let our slaves go free. But why prescribe periods of rest at all? Can't we be trusted to take breaks when we need them? Actually, no. For the most part, we are actually horrible at taking breaks and listening to our own needs. So much so that the Torah and God prescribed mandated pauses in our days, our weeks, our years, and our life cycles. But more than prescribed periods of rest, the Torah also designed a system by which we would need to take a pause before acting. Many of our mitzvot, many of our commandments, actually require us to do just that. Think before we act. Take the kosher laws, for example. Each time we reach for food, we must take a momentary pause to think about what we are eating. In addition to the general questions anyone might ask themselves, such as, is it healthy? Is it still good to eat? A kosher observant Jew would take an extra few moments to consider whether the food is kosher and or permitted to them in that moment. It is these pauses and moments of reflection that allow us to consciously conquer our urges and lead a more intentional life. It is also what distinguishes us from the animals. When an animal sees food, they are apt to eat it without a moment's hesitation. They don't care if it's being saved for a special event later. They don't care if it might make them sick. There's food, they will eat. In fact, when commenting on the kosher laws in Leviticus, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, one should not say, I have no desire to eat the meat of pig. Rather, one should say, I desire it, but what should I do? Adonai has decreed against it. 20th century scholar Dr. Aaron Barth goes further and argues that most of our mitzvot, especially the ones that don't have a societal reason, like not murdering or stealing, are actually meant to help train us to control our urges. He writes, therefore, the main purpose of the mitzvot is to accustom the human being to rule over his urges and not allow his urges to rule over him. All of these things train us to pause briefly between the moment that the urge demands to be satisfied and the moment that we satisfy it. That pause is the decisive moment. It transforms the inclination into an act of will. Urge brings man to act compulsively, even when he knows he will regret his actions later. Will, on the other hand, is what leads to action after the urge has passed through a filter of thought. It is one of the central goals of the system of mitzvot in general. By this argument, the mitzvot are created specifically to help us learn to identify and overcome our natural urges. Each time we take that extra moment to consider whether the food we are about to eat is kosher, which blessing may be appropriate for the moment we are in, or if our actions are actually aligned with our values, we are conditioning our minds, our bodies, and our spirits to respond to our heart and not just our urges. So too with other aspects of our lives. How much better do we respond when we take a moment to breathe? However brief that moment is, when we reflect, we respond more coherently. How often have we acted instinctively in either word or deed and immediately regretted it? How different might we have responded if we had that bottle of water? Knowing our weakness, the Torah prescribes various moments when we are to pause, whether for an extra moment, a day, or even a year at a time. It is in these moments that we have time to pause and reflect on how we truly want to act and show up in this world. And more than just prescribing these moments of pause, the Torah, through its system of mitzvot, helps to train us to take pauses throughout our day. It is specifically that pause, that moment of reflection, that defines our humanity. It is specifically that pause that allows us to present our best selves and respond with kindness rather than anger, with compassion rather than fear. Knowing that the ability to conquer our urges takes work and practice, Judaism devised a system throughout our lives to help keep us on our toes. The mitzvot are our training ground. Whether we are being asked to let our bodies rest, our land lie fallow, or even deciding what and when to eat, it can all be seen as teaching us to act with intention and integrity. In this way, Judaism focuses more on our actions rather than our thoughts. It acknowledges that as humans, we will have negative thoughts and desires. But rather than chiding us for having those thoughts at all, Judaism teaches us to recognize them and to actively choose the proper course of action despite our urges. When we take that extra moment, we choose our actions and our words, and we allow ourselves to reach our highest potential.